Well, welcome into the Storycraft Cafe, where I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I am super excited to welcome into the cafe an old dear friend of mine, Kevin Tumlinson, the word slinger himself,
The
shows
word
up
slinger.
here to the Storycraft Cafe. Um, Kevin writes a series that I dearly love, the Dan Kotler series, and which is kind of one of my most favorite genres and subgenres in fiction is the archaeological thriller. We've talked about this in the past, but it's a subgenre that I feel like gets doesn't get the widespread love
Yeah.
um, that that I that I kind of wish that it did. But I absolutely love anytime that I see a new Dan Collar release coming out. The Forgotten Rune is the newest, and it is book 13 in the
That's
Kotler
13.
series.
Yeah.
That is wild, Kevin. How long have you been writing Kotler? Well, first, welcome to the
Ah,
show.
well, thanks for having me, man. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. I always enjoy hooking up with you, chatting with you, man.
absolutely.
Coddler and I started hanging out together back in 2016. So it's been that makes it 8 years
Yeah,
since the first Cottler. And ironically, the first Cottler story to be published was not the Coelho Medallion, which is the first Cottler novel, but was
really.
a short story or a novella called The Brass Hall, because I was working on the Cottler novel and I first of all wanted there to be more than one thing for people to purchase and go to. And so I
Sure.
wrote this novella and published it first while the novel was on pre-order. So the very first Kotler story was actually The Brass Hall, which is still, I think, a good story, but a little
Yeah.
different than the rest of the series. Yeah.
I don't think I knew that. That's fascinating.
You're the first official person I've told that story to, Hank.
I love it. I love it. Um, you have said, before, and this is something that I definitely resonate with, that writing Kotler, is interesting because he's smarter than you are,
Yeah.
and, I would say that Kotler's specialties are probably just different than yours. But, how do you write a character and an ongoing series, about a character that you don't necessarily share the same background with?
There's I could say research, that there's a lot of research.
Yeah,
That's kind of a soft lie, because I do a lot of research, but it's not. When you hear research, you generally think when you hear research when it comes to writing,
yeah,
you think there's a guy in a library surrounded by dusty tomes,
right.
glasses on the tip of his nose, knuckles all swollen from arthritis, and he's meticulously outlining and whatever. That's not the way I do research. My research comes from my experience. So when I go out into the world, which I do a lot, I travel a lot. uh I'm always kind of keeping an eye out for, like, well, that's an interesting setting, that's
Yeah,
an interesting personality trait someone just portrayed, and that's an interesting bit of history, and that's an interesting piece of architecture, and all that stuff sort of melts together in my brain. And so I'm a generalist when it comes to my knowledge and background. I have some specific things that I've specialized in over the years, but when it comes to Kotler, like, I don't have a background in anthropology or archaeology per se, but I have an interest in it. And
right.
the same goes for, quantum physics and a whole bunch of other disciplines. And so I just consume things that are interesting to me. And when it comes time for Kotler to do something crazy, I have an idea of what he can do. And then I go supplement that with some quick Googling and Wikipedia reading. And now these days I use ChatGPT as my research assistant. I get a lot of great. I have to go double check literally everything the thing tells me, but
Sure.
it kind of can put me on a good path I joke
Right.
around. I was telling my wife this earlier. Like I treat Chat GPT as a research assistant and a really dumb writer's room because I'll pitch an idea or I'll ask for a pitch and it'll give me the worst possible responses. And
Right.
I'll say, well, though, and I'm thinking like these are awful. You're an idiot. This is awful. But what about this? And Chat GPT is kind of a yes man. So it's like, oh, that's the most excellent idea I've ever heard. And then I
Right.
say, well, yeah, but what if you this instead? Well, that's even better. And then by the time it's all done, Chat GPT hasn't given me anything useful, but I've come up with because I'm like countering everything it says, I've come
Right.
up with a bunch of great ideas. So
Well, what I've found ChatGPT useful for lately is a sounding board, and very much
yeah,
like what you're saying.
yeah,
Is that some of my best book ideas have come through conversations with
yeah,
where I would say like, "Hey, Kevin, I've had this great idea for this and this," and you're like, that's great. What if you did this? And I'm like, "Oh, that's an even better idea." And then I could branch it this way. And in the course of conversation, the back and forth, the story
yeah,
grows because you have someone that's challenging you, pushing
yeah,
back a little bit, and forcing you to think differently. And and that's exactly what I'm using ChatGPT for
yeah,
these days. It's just that kind of partner that I can just bounce ideas back and forth, and that's where it's been more valuable to me than any of the other tricks that
yeah,
we see people, trying to make it do, which, you know, it can a little, but as something to challenge you to think differently, I think is where it
yeah,
really shines.
yeah. You might ask yourself, self, why don't you just talk to humans and do that? And I would answer, well, self. Uh, the problem for me with humans is one, no human wants to spend that much time talking to me about the sort of insane things that I'm asking about. And
Right,
two, there's if they do want to talk to me about it, it's because they probably want to write a book themselves and they want to sort of impose their ideas on my
right,
story. But the AI doesn't do that. And so I can have these random conversations. The kind of conversations like when you were in high school. I never got high, but I hear that when you get high, you have conversations like this. But like in high school and college, when I'm hanging out with my buddies and we say, what if the universe is really just a big what do they what I forget what they used to call those things where they had the board and the little plastic things.
the
There was a
light
light,
bright.
the light bright. What's the universe? Just a big light bright. And so that sparks a whole conversation. Well, if I say that to an AI, we get first of all, I'm told how excellent an idea it is.
Of
And
course,
then
of course.
if I say like, well, what if the universe is a light bright? Well, like, what does that mean for us as humans? And it'll give me two or three, fairly plausible, boring things. And then suddenly
Right,
we're off and running. Like I can start mashing things together, and I've got a great story, and without
right.
it trying to impose its own story on my work. So
Right,
yeah,
right. Yeah, and that's the problem with having friends that are writers is
yeah,
that when you start talking things, they've got something they're thinking about and all of a sudden you've got this weird hodgepodge of
yeah.
and who owns the ideas. That's that,
Yeah,
it gets
I'm
dangerous.
incredibly careful about sharing ideas with other writers, not because I think they're going to steal them, but because I think they're going to talk me out of them.
Right,
And I'm
right.
doing this thing now. I have a contract with I don't know. I'm gonna say this without giving away any actual details, but JD Barker and I signed a contract together to co-author a thriller novel, and
Nice.
so I'm working on an outline for that now, which is not a natural thing for me. I am not an
Yeah.
outliner. I'm a pantser, but he used to be a pantser, but his work with JD Patterson convinced him that outlines are the way to go. So I'm trying to be a good boy and follow that lead. But I made the mistake in an earlier outline of sharing the partially finished outline with him, and he came back with like, "Be sure to try this, do this, how about this, whatever. And it completely derailed me, and I wasn't able to finish working on that outline. And
Mm.
I've since started over with a whole new one that I'm not sharing with him until it's done. Because he's well-meaning, and he's
Right.
brilliant, you know, I mean, he does a great
Yeah.
job. He's clearly very talented. He's a New York Times bestseller. You know, he's done this for quite a while now. He's doing a Flatliners, sequel.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
yeah, which is really, impressive, and, uh and, you know, so there's a little pressure there. I wanna
Yeah.
impress JD, you know, and I want him to be happy with what we produce. But I realized like, oh yeah, I can't. This is why I don't share it with anybody else. So I can't
Right.
share it with him until it's ready. Then he can
So
trash it all he wants. I'll do rewrites, but
right.
it'll stall me in the middle if we go too early.
So let's take a bit of a side road here. The pantser versus plotter argument.
Yeah,
Um, you have traditionally been a pantser,
yeah,
um, and I have traditionally been a pantser, but I'm learning to appreciate some aspects of planning. Um, and I still wouldn't. My friend Josh Hayes is a
yeah,
hardcore planner, and
yeah,
we've had fun, little arguments over the years about it. But he told me one time, he said, everyone outlines. It's just, are you going to outline before you write the book or after you
right,
finish the first draft?
yeah,
Okay, that's great.
yeah.
Y-
That's been my joke forever is that I do outline. It's just long form. Right.
right, exactly. Um, but I have come to appreciate the concept of more of a roadmap where, say I like to use the analogy, say for instance, I'm traveling from Southern California to New York.
Yeah,
And there are several different routes that I could take. I could go across the southern United States and take a left and go up the East Coast. I could go straight across the middle. I could go up to the north and go across. But if I figure out there are some places I want to go along the route, that will help me decide, to how the route is going to go.
yeah,
And so I start thinking about in terms of map points, and I start thinking of those terms, and that kind of helps me to conceptualize the story ahead of time while
yeah,
still leaving room for the daily adventures that may just pop up. And so I'm kind of in there now. I'm somewhere in the middle.
yeah.
How has this experience been, other than getting, you know, side
Well,
derailed, by his input, but,
I mean, first of
like,
all,
how does
it
it feel when a pantser tries to, wear these clothes?
I just wanna address the driving across the country part because we lived in a van full time for, like, 3
Yes.
years. My wife is the plotter and planner in our relationship, but when she wasn't picking, I was just randomly driving. If we're going to California, we'll get there eventually. That was my
Yeah. We're just gonna go
uh,
that way.
this whole experience has been, kinda eye-opening for me because I was going through a little bit of a slump over the past year, all the
Yeah.
changes in my life, and there's been a lot of stress and a lot of things that have kind of derailed me, and so my writing had slowed down significantly. Um, so, I've got 2 other books kinda on the board right now, and they've stalled a little, not stalled. I've just gotten to a point where I need to step back and I need to deal with this outline is the
Yeah.
thing. It's given me a pretty strong appreciation for the idea of outlines, and I've studied a lot of different methods of how to do this, and none of them ever really work for me. I even I'm good friends with Cameron Sutter from Plotter, and I
Sure.
bought that software, and like I don't know, I'm overthinking it. It's too complicated for me. I don't know. I get I get anxious when I try to use it.
Yeah.
I love the software. I use it for all kinds of things other than plotting. Uh, so we've
That's
had
funny.
he and I have had conversations about that.
Yeah.
But um, what it's done is kind of open up my mind. Like I'm basically pantsing a plot. I'm
Mhm.
pantsing an outline, right? So that's where I'm kind of trying to justify it. It's I've restarted this outline a couple of times now, because I kind of write myself into a corner with it
Yeah.
and realize that, this isn't the direction. I can't figure out the next thing. And rather than stress about it, I restarted it in this current version of it. It's like it's just trucking along. And I think and I'm legitimately avoiding almost everything I created in the first, outline. Uh so what it's made me do is or forced me to do is kind of face this idea that it's okay. I may be comfortable with going into the unknown, but that isn't always necessarily the best approach to telling a good story. And in particular, when you're co-authoring something with someone else, you do kind of need that outline.
Right.
And so, and I'm a generalist, like I said. So I overthink things. So my first couple of versions of the outline were basically books.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm 20 chapters in and I'm at 400 pages of outline.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that was happening. Uh, so yeah, it's teaching me to be more concise with the general concepts and leave myself the leeway. This is what's working for me. Leave myself the leeway to come back and fill in the gaps. So each gosh, the word has escaped my brain, but the each plot point, each
Yeah.
beat, that's the term
Yeah.
I was looking for. Each beat is not complete in and of itself. It's just the waypoint, like you're saying. Like this, I want to get to here, I want to get to here, I want to get to here. And how I get to there in between those notes is the jazz that will be my writing, which is much more comfortable for me. Um, so yeah. And I'll tell you this too. The thing that's helped me a lot. So I started doing research. When I looked back this time, I decided I'm going to take the concept we came up with, and I'm going to, in that concept were these comps. Like here's 3 books and 2 movies that have a similar theme, and we should look at those, right? So I decided, okay, I'm going to do that. So I took that stuff into Chat GPT again and had it do like tell me, give me the way these books and films handle tension and suspense and plot,
Mhm.
and then compare them and tell me where they overlap. And that was a great exercise. uh I have also been using it to do research on some of the archaeological stuff that's part of the book, stuff I know about, but I'm like, maybe there's things I don't know. Turns out there is. And so that
Sure.
research comes up. And so as I got a stack here, like big stack of, I'm physically printing stuff out for the first time since like the 90s. Uh,
Right.
and I'm just going through and reading it. And I've probably read this stuff now 5 times. And each time I make a little note about, hey, I underline something, make a little note. Now those are becoming beats for the story. Like, okay, these 3 archaeological, or well, these 3 mythological things sort of
Mhm.
touch each other. So how do they factor in with my story? And so I jot an idea. So that's what's happening. Like,
I
this is
love it.
probably unconventional, but it's helping me for I don't do outlines, but so
Yeah.
this is what's working for me.
Um, you have been in the indie publishing space, a decade, little longer than a
Yeah,
decade.
yeah.
Um, and, I I, uh, I first started publishing in 2014, I
Okay.
think, and I think you did also around that time, if I
Uh,
remember?
2008 was when I
2008.
self-published my first book,
Okay.
and I had a traditionally published book before that.
Okay. So, a lot's happened in the
Yeah,
last in the last decade. The last couple of years, a lot has
yeah,
happened. You have not only been writing and publishing, but you also worked for Drafted Digital for a while. So you definitely were in that
yeah,
aspect of publishing. Um, and a lot's going on. The things that we used to think about a decade ago, this is how you set up your business, because indie publishing is a business, and you think about having things in your back catalog so that when someone discovers you as a writer, they have more product that they can pick up other than just your new release. Lots of strategies
Yeah.
that we've used. I was talking with Rick Partlow yesterday, who is an absolute monster in the
Yeah.
military sci-fi space,
Yeah.
and he was he was telling me that in military sci-fi right now, um, it's very much a game of publish quickly, publish a lot,
Yeah.
because your back catalog doesn't matter. People are buying your new release, and that's what you have to focus on. Yeah, he has 78 books in his back catalog, and there will be people that say, "Oh, I like Rick's writing. Let me go dig into, something else he's doing." But in that genre space specifically, the things that we thought about are not necessarily working anymore.
Yeah.
Um, how's it going in the thriller space where you occupy, where long series, like for instance, Rick has a series that's got 16 books in it so far, and the thriller space is not necessarily um geared towards series. I mean, Kotler, you've got 13 books. I think of like Sigma Force.
Yeah.
There's I don't know how many books in that series, and on and on.
Yeah.
But there are also big players that publish standalone books, and they do very well in
Yeah.
this space. Where do you see the thriller space and the archaeological thriller space specifically? And do you find that the business aspects of writing and publishing there are changing, have changed?
Mm.
Um, how do you think of that as not only as the writer, but also with your publisher hat?
Yeah. Then things have definitely changed. I'm gonna say first off that in many ways, rapid release has not only lost effectiveness, is actually starting to become a detriment for a lot of writers because AI has empowered a segment of the population to churn out, literally thousands of books a day. Like,
Right.
the when I left Draft Digital, we were already seeing, users uploading thousands of books on individual accounts each day and
Wow.
hundreds of those people, doing it. So, we'd get several 100,000 submissions in a day, whereas, a few years ago, we'd maybe get 50.
Right.
If we were lucky, if we were lucky, if we were on a heavy day, we'd get,
Yeah.
20 to 50 books. So I think what's happening on that score is that readers who don't want to read AI books, there is a segment that is fine with it. But those
Yeah.
who are adamantly against it are now wary of rapid release because if you're releasing a whole bunch of books, you must be using AI. So that's what I see in my genre, which is fine because I got kind of burnt out, doing the
Yeah.
book a month thing. So the flip side of that is when your readers do discover you, so that's the new readers. They're not going
Mhm.
for that stuff. The
Right.
readers who love your work, they wouldn't buy AI from you anyway because they love your work, but
Sure.
they still want, they'd get a book a day if they could. So there's a balance we have to strike there. And I'm aiming for consistency and quality over quantity. Um, and I think that's the direction that a lot of us are going. I know, my fellows in this business, like Ernie Dempsey and others, they're doing that. Um, I think in terms of business, like not too much has changed because the marketing is all effectively the same. In that email is still king.
Sure.
Um, Ads have changed. I don't rely on ads for anything now. I mean, I still have a few here and there, but they don't really move the needle much. So I don't put a lot of effort and time in there. There are some who are killing it with Facebook ads and BookBub ads and
Right.
Amazon ads still. And a lot of those, when I try their same methods, don't work for me and my audience. So who can really say what that is? My One of the things I've always been a content marketer over everything else. And one of the things that I've kind of started relying very heavily on is Substack, uh, because it has an integrated email list, and you own that list, and there's ways to monetize it and that sort of thing. What I've discovered though is I get probably each day I get 20 or 30 new free subscribers. I have some pay. Got a modest number of paid subscribers.
Yeah.
But I get stumble upon traffic on that stuff every day in a way that no other social media platform ever allowed me to do. And since when I
Interesting.
post, I always include a way to find more of my work. I do see um, activity on book sales from that. So that sharing that content has become a tactic and method for me. There's other avenues I'm exploring. Some I'm not willing to talk about because I don't want people rushing to them to do them. But I'm doing a few things that I think are helpful on the marketing front. But the game has changed. A lot of the players that we know, like we got people kind of moving in and out of the industry now. I mean, look at what's gone on. Mark Dawson and his bunch, the self-publishing formula podcast is gone now. Michael Evans is gone from Ream. We've got a whole bunch of shakeup in the industry. Me leaving Draft to Digital, that started it all somehow. It really did. I'm not going to say I was the cause of it all, but it was the first. And suddenly the whole industry shifted and changed. So
That's so
anyway,
funny.
yeah.
So what are you doing with your daily life now that you are no longer with Drafted Digital? You mentioned the new contract that you're
Yeah.
working on. What's your daily work life like these days?
Yeah, that's I'm a novelist full time now. Back to it. I used to be before I came on board with D2D. Um, the revenue has been kind of up and down, but it's sort of generally trending upward, which is good. I'm entertaining. So there's been several opportunities to do. I've turned down 3 separate invites to be a CEO for different businesses since I left Book Sweeps as their CEO. There's just things that I don't feel are a fit, and or some of the offers came from companies that I felt were disreputable. Uh, uh, some came
Yeah.
from some really good ones and I was almost loath to turn down. But there's that stuff. I've got people who want to partner and things like that. But I've mostly been focused on writing. There is a potential thing that if I get involved in it, and I think I will, uh, is not just going to benefit me, but is seriously going to benefit the indie author space. And so if it comes through, I think it will. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I had said I'm not going back to working with anybody else. I'm going to stay full time as an author, but this would be too good an opportunity for me in my community. So if it comes through, I'm going to do it.
I'm excited to hear what it is. So
Yeah. Well, you're going to have to hold on because
yeah, I'm patient. I'm patient.
yeah.
I'm not gonna grill you about it. But um, you you have dabbled in science fiction as well as the archaeological thriller space.
Yeah.
Um, are you writing any science fiction anymore? Have you kind of dedicated yourself that this is your wheelhouse? And what do you feel about authors who kind of have one foot in one genre while kind of leaving their options open for another genre? Are you of the mind that an author needs to kind of figure out where they thrive and stay there, and that the dabbling in different genres is has a tendency to cannibalize
Yeah.
your ability to connect with readers?
My stake in this has always been that I mean, I've always written cross genre. I not too long ago, a little over a year ago, I did a serialized science fiction novella on Substack that's now an ebook on Kindle or not just Kindle, everywhere,
Yeah.
called God Mode. And that was when I write short fiction, it tends to be science fiction. I've discovered. Um, my stake, my position on the whole thing is it all depends on your overall strategy, whether or not you should do cross genre. Um, if you want rapid growth and success, you're going to want to tend to stick to not just one genre, but one series. I mean, I know there's, like you said, a lot of these writers who do standalones, and I like the idea of standalones, but it's harder to grow an audience. So that's the slowest method. Doing
Yeah.
standalones is the slowest method for growth. Doing a series is faster, more reliable. Sticking with one genre is more reliable. Uh, you get bigger and better results faster. If you are like me though, and you just have a lot of stories to tell, there's no solid harm to cross genre writing. Just know that your audience, if your audience came in on, archaeological thrillers, and you give them a fantasy novel, they may not follow you. Uh,
Right.
that's what Jim Rollins has done with his stuff, and he's still
Yep.
got a following because the secret for him, and I think the same is true for me, is we cultivated. Uh, I can't speak for him. I know that I cultivated readers of Kevin Tumlinson rather
Right.
than readers of Kevin Tumlinson's archaeological thrillers. I was writing sci-fi and a little bit of fantasy when I switched to thrillers, and I just carried it all over to the same audience, and they stuck it out with me, most of them. And over the years, I've written, you know, mostly thrillers, and then occasionally I release a sci-fi novel or a philosophy book or something else. And
Yeah.
some do better than others, but there's always a nice reaction to that stuff. So the key is to focus on building the audience that follows you as the brand rather than simply the character you created or the genre you write in.
I know a lot of authors struggle with that, and some will argue against the idea that readers will follow an author. That there's a almost a nihilistic attitude toward readers sometimes, that, well, they're not going to follow you. They may like this book, but they're fickle and they're going to move on. And I think you have proven uh, against that point, that people will latch on to a writer that they like. There's a writer that I started reading in the 90s. And I pick up every one of his books when it comes out. Um, Even though he hasn't written anything that I truly loved in probably a decade,
Yeah,
but I have a connection to this writer whom I've never met. He's from my home state, and he writes in a genre that I don't normally read, but I have this nostalgic thing about his books,
yeah,
and I pick up every new release, and I'm like, this time is going to be better. Rarely has.
yeah.
But that's beside the point. I'm a ride or die. Um, do you have any have you learned anything about how to build that relationship with readers that has served you well, and that maybe other people could take some pointers from?
Number one is anytime a reader reaches out to me, positive or negative, I very enthusiastically respond, thank them, offer them whatever wisdom I can. Uh, that you would not believe how effective that is in growing loyal fans. Like just returning a single email. I've had plenty of readers write me an email and say, "Hey, I found a typo," or "Hey, I love this," and I will write back and just gush gratitude to them for even taking the time. Thank you so much for taking the time to write to me. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your feedback. And I will fix that typo. I appreciate you pointing that out. Or I'm sorry you didn't like my political take on that character. Things happen, and most of the time I'll get an email back like I never expected to get a response. So thank you, and they become readers for life at that point. Um, so that interaction is number one. Like if you want to build a following of yourself as the author, make sure that you are interacting. People talk
Right.
about engagement, but they usually mean like one way engagement. They want readers to engage with you. You need to be
Right.
as actively engaged with the readers. And it sounds exhausting. And it can be exhausting if you do it wrong. But the right way to do it is when you get those emails, and I get thousands of them. And or when someone tags you on social media, make the effort. I like to share things that readers sent me. One
Yeah.
of my readers, it was touching. She sent me a message on Facebook, private message, to talk about how she had had a stroke. She had been a reader before the stroke, but she had a stroke, and during her recovery, they encouraged her to do something. Reading was encouraged, and I had released a book, and she struggled to read it, but it was a part of her therapy. And then she read the next book when it came out, and she wrote to just thank me for being part of what helped her recover. And I was in tears, and I asked her, "Would you mind? I'll scrub your name from it, but would you mind if I shared this?" And she didn't mind at all. And when I shared that story with my audience and then on the various platforms, what was astounding was how many other readers immediately popped up to share similar stories.
Oh, I love it.
And so there that engagement back and forth there was enriching to me, touching to me, but it also touched the lives of other readers and inspired them to go, not just reach out to me, but like, share their personal stories, whether it had anything to do with me or not, frankly, but share their stories about how these things happen. And then you get this community now of very civil, kind, loving people willing to support you and each other. I mean, that's the way to go. If my brand's going to be anything, I want it to be that.
Absolutely. TW has a question for us, and thanks for joining us today, TW. Do you have a piece of advice to new authors, something you wish you knew before? Um, in 2024, if you were going to launch an author career and had not had the couple of decades experience that you've had, what do you think? How do you think you would approach it if you didn't have any of the infrastructure that you had worked on all this time? If you were coming into it with a new book, a new face, new personality that no one knows about,
Yeah.
what are some of the strategies that you think you might employ?
I used to have all kinds of answers for this question, and a lot of them changed over the years.
Of
Uh,
course.
because life happens.
Yeah.
I
Well,
would
and
say
the industry changes.
the industry changes, yeah,
Yeah.
and we change, and the
Mhm.
work itself can change and change you.
Right.
I think for me, one of the best pieces of advice I've seen in recent years came from Elizabeth Gilbert. She wrote a book called Big Magic, and in
Yeah.
that book she said, uh, you know, I'm going to paraphrase here, but like, you don't have to force your art to pay your living.
Yes.
And there's a lot of ways to take that, but here's how I decided it applies to me and would apply to me as an incoming writer. Because when I started writing, like most, probably all authors, like I felt like I really needed those books to take off and become my full time living. And I wanted that. And there is nothing at all wrong with that. That's part of the dream. It can become a reality. But I think for me, I started feeling an angst and a disillusionment with myself because it didn't happen right away. And then when it did
Mhm.
happen, there came a point where it sort of unhappened. And then when it came back, it was harder. And then it happened and then unhappened again. And now it's happening again. And there's sort of ups and downs in this. And I think starting out, I would tell myself as a young writer, like, don't put that kind of pressure on the writing. Write because you love it. This is the career that this is one of those careers that if you wouldn't do it without being paid, then you shouldn't bother doing it. Like,
Right.
that's
Right.
not an argument that you shouldn't be paid. That's an
Yeah.
argument that the work comes first and the pay comes later, right? I would encourage myself to keep the process going, keep enjoying, uh, develop the discipline without the reward, and then the reward will come, and then you
Yeah.
will be full time. It will be your living. I I believe that could be true. I honestly believe that could be true of literally every writer.
Yeah.
But when you
And
start off with, I have to make this my full-time living, you kill it. I mean,
yeah.
you put so much pressure on it, it can't survive. So
Well,
I
and
would,
the temptation is that you start compromising the art that you wanted to make
yeah,
in service of getting it out quicker and,
yeah.
to hit the algorithm or, whatever the
That's where
buzzword is this week.
the poisonous part of right to market starts to come
Yeah.
in. There's nothing wrong with writing to market, but if you're writing something from to market that you would never read yourself, that you don't like, you're only writing it because it's the hot topic right now, you're making huge mistakes. You won't be able to pay those dividends. But
Right.
are if you love writing uh, cozy mysteries that involve a talking cat, and you are writing those, and that genre is not hot anymore, but you love it so much. I promise you, if you continue to write it because you love it, uh, eventually that market swings back around.
Yeah.
And if you
Oh,
write
bell
something that
bottom.
has a small market, there's no guarantee that market won't grow. But like, this is something I had a discussion with a fellow writer. I won't say who, because I won't say who. But I had an epiphany that all writers need readers, and our tendency is to aim very wide, very broad. Um, we want readers from worldwide. So, but if you think about it, you don't. If you had, let's say, you had those 10,000 loyal fans that David Grohl, I think, talked about.
Mhm.
Uh, do they have to be worldwide? Why couldn't they be right in your own backyard? Like, why
Right.
couldn't you be the most popular writer in your hometown? And if there's 10,000 people in your hometown and all 10,000 of them buy your books, you are probably making a pretty solid living as a writer. And you
Right.
probably have money to start marketing to a broader audience. So that's part of the whole game to me is like don't concentrate on trying to build the biggest audience worldwide as fast as possible. Concentrate on trying to find the 100 people in your suburb who might like your work, and then when you've got those, set the next record. The next goal. I'm
Right.
going to meet 1,000 people in my hometown and 10,000 in my city or county, and just keep growing outward instead of trying to grow all at once.
I love it. I love it. That is that perspective. If you can maintain that perspective, um, I don't know anyone that got into writing to make a quick buck. Every writer I've ever talked to felt like they had a story in them that they needed to get out, and
Yeah.
then that story begets other stories, and storytellers are going to tell stories, and
Yeah.
then somewhere along the way we get sidetracked by the business of it and the publishing, and not that any of that is bad. That's not what I'm saying, but it's so easy to lose focus on why we wanted to become writers in the first place.
Yeah.
And you can separate those two things. I think you'll be much healthier as an artist. It's just you can find that happiness in your writing again.
Yeah. I would much rather be a excellent writer and a terrible marketer than a
Yeah,
terrible writer and an excellent marketer. Um,
right.
but that's because my goal is to tell good stories. If your goal is to make a living from things, generating a product isn't that difficult. AI will do it for you now. If you're excellent at marketing, you can generate garbage that people will pay for. Uh, Now, the ideal thing is to be both and to love both. I don't As much as I have been in marketing my whole career, I don't like marketing. So it doesn't inspire me. And so I look for the sort of median I can fall to. What's the minimal viable product for me when it comes to marketing? What's the thing I can do least but enjoy most? And
Right.
that's where the content marketing stuff comes in for me. I've slowed down a lot on things like that. These days it's almost all writing content, but various times, and I do podcasting as well, as you know.
Yeah.
But I've severely cut down on what I do in the podcasting space. Like I went from having like 8 to 10 podcasts at a time to like right now I do Writers Inc. with JD and
Yeah.
Christine Daigle and Jenna Brown. And I do the writers, or I do the Wordslinger podcast, which is back after like a 4 year break. And those are the two. And I got people trying to talk me into YouTube channels. I'm not opposed to YouTube channels, but I know how much work they are. I
Right.
don't feel like I have a topic that I want to, come back to. In order to be successful at YouTube, it's about consistency and persistence
Right.
and volume. And I'd rather be writing. So,
Yeah.
and social media has never been a big favorite of mine, but it's even less so in this political season. Um, so my marketing has changed quite a bit. The ads don't seem to work as much anymore, so I don't enjoy trying to do that at all. So my advice on the marketing front for folks is like find something you really enjoy doing as marketing. Do that one thing while writing takes up the rest of your time. And
Yeah.
if your goal is make a ton of money, you're going to want to figure out a strategy for that, and it may involve in bringing in other people to help you if you don't have the time. But there's always a cost to marketing, and
Yeah.
I'm not willing to pay the cost of both time and money. I will give you part of one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right now,
Well,
that's
and
part of my time. Part.
well, and when all of the gimmicks fail, which they always do, there's always something that's hot
Yeah.
that people are making a ton of money from, and those things change constantly because of all sorts of factors. But when all of those things fail, you you can always fall back on the relationship that you built with your readers.
That's the number one thing. That's why email, despite it being decades older than literally every other type of digital marketing that people use, um, email has remained king because it's a relationship engine. That's why Substack works for me as well. Social media could work that way, except for the fact that it's stacked against you. You hear people talk about the algorithm all the time being penalized. YouTube, in particular, like if you use a phrase that YouTube doesn't like, you get not just demonetized, but just you disappear off of your own subscribers lists. Same with Twitter, same with Facebook, same with LinkedIn, all of it.
Yeah.
So, people talk about emails like this is a thing you control and you own, which is true. But above and beyond that, it's about the relationship. And
Yeah.
if you're only just sending email and not reading and responding to emails, that's going to be a problem for you. I'd say stop wasting time and money on everything else until you are comfortable with responding to every email you get. That bogged me down because I get thousands of them,
Yeah.
every practically every day. And I got to a point where I'm like, how do I answer every email and do the social media stuff and make YouTube videos and podcasts and go and appearances and and the answer is you can't. You have to
Yeah.
pick the thing that works best, that has the least cost for you, and you really get to a point where that's automated, and then maybe you add something else. That's
Right.
that's the key.
Right. Kevin, every time we talk, I get fired up and I just want to go write a book,
You
and
should do that.
I should do that. I've got 6 in the works right now in various
Where are you
stages.
at right now? What do you got? How many you got in your published library?
12,
That's
uh,
phenomenal.
yeah, or
That's
so.
phenomenal. Yeah.
I've got a couple I'm reworking, and I've got a trilogy that I'm in the midst of writing, and it's all over the place. But anyway, um, The Forgotten Rune, Dan Kotler, book 13 is
Yeah.
out everywhere now. We'll put links to it in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find. Kevin, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the stuff that you're up to and get on your mailing list, which we know is the most important way to stay in
Yeah.
contact with you, what's the best place for folks to land on to find all things
If
Kevin Tumlinson?
If you go, my website is kevintumlinson.com. If I know my name is hard to spell, I think I've got some alternatives for you to get there. I think authorontheroad.com is one way you can find it if you can't spell my name. But and you can Google me and you will find me. But yeah, do that. That's where you'll find Substack, my podcasts, my books, everything I do is right there on that site.
Excellent. We'll point everyone to that, and we'll send folks your way. Uh, Everyone, thank you for joining us today. Kevin, thank you so much for being generous with your time, and we appreciate you hanging out with us for a little bit.
Always, always, man. Thanks for having me.